Our topic for the STR project was mixed methods surveys. This webinar will include an overview of surveys, specifically discuss online surveys and surveys in occupational therapy, and then finally discuss emergent trends, controversies, and important directions for surveys. And we will finish with a knowledge check. Learning objectives for this webinar include that learners will be able to identify the basic elements of a survey, learn to distinguish between quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method surveys, as well as identify questions characteristic of both quantitative and qualitative surveys, develop an online survey and general procedures in creating them, apply surveys in occupational therapy practice and research, and learners will be able to examine emergent trends, controversies, and important directions for survey research. The active learning component of our webinar is the QR code on the last slide of the presentation. That will take you to a knowledge check quiz. Please complete this to see how much you have learned from watching our webinar.
First, we will go over a quick overview of surveys. What is a survey? The term survey usually refers to a study that has used a representative sample, and if the entire population is involved in the study, it is a census. A survey is a research method, the purpose and aims of which have already been stated, and although data collection must be standardized, there are options for data collection within a survey. A survey, then, is the research method used to structure the collection and analysis of standardized information from a defined population using a representative sample of that population. Survey research can include qualitative and quantitative research, but is usually quantitative with a limited qualitative element.
These following terms are essential to understand when evaluating and developing surveys. Survey populations consist of all the units, individuals, households, organizations to which one desires to generalize survey results. The sample frame is the list from which a sample is to be drawn from in order to represent the survey population. The sample consists of all units of the population that are drawn for inclusion in the survey. This could be a random selection or a specific selected sample that follows certain characteristics for inclusion in the survey. A completed sample consists of all the units that complete the questionnaire. Coverage errors results from every unit in the survey population not having a known non-zero chance of being included in the sample. The sampling error is the result of collecting data from only a subset rather than all of the members of the sampling frame, which in other words it's only gathering data from a certain portion instead of actually receiving the data we actually want to get that would represent the whole group or the whole population, which could lead to misrepresentation of the group as a whole. And the non-response error is the unimportant or irrelevant responses from people selected for the survey that are different compared to those who do respond in a way that is important to the study. In other words, it's just the responses in which are irrelevant or the answers show that the question was misunderstood by the sample.
When looking at the distribution of surveys, it's important to look at the whole survey process. This is broken down into 10 individual steps. The first step is identifying a general topic area. At this stage, it's important to remember that you will have to remain motivated throughout your research, so always make sure that the topic is one that will hold your interest and enthuse you. Step 2 is investigating the literature. Reading reports of past research will also provide you with valuable insight of appropriate design features for your own survey. Step 3 is identifying a hypothesis and objectives. Always make sure to keep the hypothesis as simple and as clear as you can. Step 4, identify a suitable population. It's important that you define the population from the outset in order to give credibility to your findings. You're not attempting to say something about everybody or everything, only the population you have identified. The fifth step is applying an appropriate sampling technique. Always make sure to be practical and only attempt what you can legitimately estimate will be achievable for your data. Continuing on with the distribution of surveys and the survey process. Step 6 is selecting and designing data collection. You will need to design the data collection instruments in such a way that will produce standardized responses. Step 7 is piloting a data collection instrument. Always pilot your data collection instrument, amend, and try again. This is the single most important step in the chain. Step 8 is collecting the data. You will be observing, interviewing, and administering your questionnaires. Step 9 is analyzing that data. Analysis does not usually begin until all data has been gathered, unless it is a staged survey with a number of rounds. And finally, step 10 in the survey process is presenting your findings and your conclusions. Always make sure to select the most appropriate form of presentation for the data you have analyzed and that your findings lead naturally on to your conclusions.
We are going to talk about the different types of surveys. There are three. The first is quantitative, which deals with numerical data. So examples of these type of questions would be how many or what percentage. And some of the types of questions that use this would be Likert scales, sliding scales, and star ratings. The next one is qualitative, which are more open-ended conversational style questions. So a lot of these will start with why. And these are commonly used in surveys that include interviews or case studies, feedback, suggestions, things like that. The final one is mixed methods, which is exactly as it sounds. It's surveys that include quantitative and qualitative questions. And these are often used by researchers to improve response rates. So an example of this would be on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you feeling today, with 5 being the best? And then a follow-up would be quantitative, and then the follow-up qualitative would be, why did you give yourself a rating of 4? So that is just the brief definition of these types of surveys. So the next 2 slides are going to show different types of quantitative and qualitative survey questions. This slide shows quantitative. So as you can see, this survey uses a Likert scale of 1 to 5 to rate if the person taking the survey has felt or experienced these different symptoms. So, as I know everyone here can read, I'm not going to read each and every question to you. However, take a moment to look at it and familiarize yourself with a quantitative survey question. And as you can see here, these are the qualitative survey questions. So this is a lot of opinions, tell us your thoughts, why do you feel this way, and what are some reasons that you feel this way. So once again, I'm not going to read each and every question to you because that would be boring. However, once again, take a moment to look at them and familiarize yourself with qualitative survey questions. In any research, including surveys, validity is a very important aspect to have. So validity refers to how well the results of the survey represent the true feelings and findings of the general population. So the quality should not be determined solely on the survey response rates, and non-response error in a survey can differ across questions and question topics. So one of those things can be people are more likely to answer quick, simple, quantitative questions rather than those kind of elaborate, tell me why you feel this way questions, especially when they're online, which we'll talk about later. So, how do you ensure that survey results are valid? Is there a kind of tool that you can use? Short answer is no. There is no common tool developed, and self-report methods, such as a survey, are very difficult in order to establish validity. So the standards for educational and psychological testing have a set of guidelines and standards that are pretty well accepted, but all researchers, well, most researchers agree that it can be improved upon. There's a gap between the guidelines and then the actual implementation of these guidelines, as I'm sure many of us are learning. So research for new validity measures is still being developed and implemented. However, how do you ensure that results looking at validity are valid. So that's currently where the research stands on validating survey responses.
Next, we will specifically discuss online surveys. First, why conduct an online survey? There's multiple reasons for conducting an online survey, but one is that large amounts of responses can be gathered from many individuals in a short period of time. Also, online surveys can be conducted at a fairly low cost, especially if email is the only form of communication with the respondents. Along with online surveys, it is important to note that they are constantly changing as the ways in which people interact with technology, including mobile devices and computers, continues to change. Although we discussed the procedures in general for creating surveys, I'm going to discuss the 14 guidelines that are most important for creating online surveys. So number one, decide how the survey will be programmed and hosted, whether that looks like a Google survey or another type of survey online, and who will actually be in charge of that survey and getting those results. Second, to determine the average technological capabilities of the respondents being surveyed. So what population are you surveying? What's their familiarity with technology and the ability to complete an online survey? Do they have that knowledge base? Will they need some help? And then ensure the survey questions will display similarly between different devices, platforms, browsers, and user settings. Fourth, ensure the questionnaire is optimized for mobile devices, either through a browser or an app. This is advantageous because then if someone opens a survey on their phone, they're able to complete it right then and there. Instead, if they wouldn't be able to complete the survey on their phone, they may try to remember to go back to it on a computer, but may forget, leading to not getting as many responses. Next, determine how the number of questions presented per page and how they will be arranged. So do you want one question per page, multiple questions per page, or all of the survey questions on one page? There are many benefits to putting one question per page, but that does take longer to complete the survey overall. A questionnaire with all the questions presented on one page, if you think about it, more closely approximates a paper survey because the person responding can preview the entire questionnaire before they answer any other questions. They can also go back and forth between questions while they're answering. And then finally, the format of multiple questions on one page could be used when surveyors want to group either related questions or when they want to ask follow-up questions based on the previous question. Next, it's also important to create interesting and informative welcome closing screens that will be appealing to the respondents. So what they see first could ultimately decide whether they will start the survey or decide against completing it. And then you want the closing screens to be written in a friendly and professional manner that tells the respondents they have completed the survey, they're done with it, and then also just that displays your gratitude and your thanks for completing it. And then next, the screen format should emphasize the respondent, not the surveyor. So you want this to emphasize the kind of people that you're asking to respond to and not yourself. Moving on to more procedures for creating online surveys, the page layout should be consistent throughout the survey, and information that is essential to completing the survey should be visually emphasized over information that is not essential. Maybe that looks like bolding the text or making the text bigger for the question, having the questions right in the center of the screen. Next, allow the option for respondents to go back to previous questions. And after that, unless it is absolutely necessary for the purposes of the survey, do not require a response to all questions. This may seem contradictory, but requiring responses can actually decrease the respondent's motivation to continue, have an effect on the measurements of the survey, because when respondents must answer a question but they do not have an answer, they will likely get frustrated and terminate the survey, or even worse, they may lie and provide an answer that is not necessarily true for them. And overall, it can just decrease the likelihood that an individual completes the entire survey. Next, carefully determine the use of interactive features within the survey. And then do not include a measurement of individuals' progress in the survey, showing how much they've done versus how much is left. That just looks like a little bar that says you're 50% done. if you're 20 minutes into a survey and you're only 50% done, that may cause people to actually exit the survey. And there have been studies examining the effectiveness of the progress monitors in surveys, and they show they rarely have the desired effect of decreasing termination of the survey. Next, limit the use of audiovisual capabilities that surveys have sparingly. And finally, allow respondents the option to come back to the survey at a later time if they do not complete it in that moment. Otherwise, they might just, if they run out of time, exit out of it and then never go back to it.
We will now discuss surveys in occupational therapy. In occupational therapy, surveys are often used to determine patient satisfaction regarding quality of health services and interventions, and could also be used to describe patient demographics. Oftentimes, we see surveys being used and applied to provide evidence-based practice. Surveys can be used to test hypotheses about the nature of relationship within a population. The data gathered from past surveys could be used to establish outcomes following interventions. That same data could also be used to compare outcomes across groups. So what interventions was found more applicable or provide a certain outcome in one group compared to another. Standardized questionnaires are surveys that could also serve as self-report instruments and could assess a client's performance and perceptions regarding function, pain, health status, and quality of life. These questionnaires also serve to support clinical decision-making as OTs receive the feedback from clients and their caregivers to guide our intervention approaches or modify the approach to better suit the client's needs and values. Some examples are the Stroke Impact Scale, McGill Pain Questionnaire short form, and the Occupational Self-Assessment. As previously mentioned, surveys may serve to help us as practitioners to apply evidence-based practice when working with clients. In this article, collaborative development of an older adult experience survey for specialized geriatric services, Gilson and colleagues worked to create a patient experience survey that was more applicable and appropriate for the older adults in this program, and it served to assess their perception of the quality of care they were receiving and the clinical experience within this program. They took these patient experience surveys and reworded and modified many of the items to make it more relevant to this population and be able to identify meaningful data related to this population and improve their healthcare quality. This is just an example that goes to show that it is important to have survey questions that are specific or perhaps phrased in a way that makes it understandable to the type of response you are looking to gather or understand more to minimize that hand nod response error we mentioned before. In another article, occupational therapists self-reported how frequently they use research and online evidence sources to guide their practice. According to the ABP core competency proposed by the Institute of Medicine, all practitioners should integrate best research with client expertise and patient values for optimum patient care and participate in learning and research activities to the extent feasible. Myers data showed that the intention to use research was higher than the OT's actual research use provided in their self-report. Also, the majority of the respondents expressed the intention to use research findings when treating clients and use it to determine value of their practice. Overall, this article is an example of how surveys could provide feedback on clients' values to provide optimum patient care and provide client-centered practice.
The assigned reading for this presentation is titled Inclusion and Perception of Hand Therapy Content in Occupational Therapy Programs, a Mixed Method Study. The purpose of this study was to gain an understanding of the perception and inclusion of hand therapy content in OT programs, and to better understand the trends in academia regarding integration of content related to hand therapy. 183 emails containing the survey were sent to accredited OT programs within the United States, where 43 were returned, representing a 23% response rate. This lended validity and generalizability to the results of the study. Results from the study show, from the surveys, that OT educators have a largely positive opinion regarding inclusion and generalizability of hand therapy content within OT and varied content inclusion. At the end of the presentation, there is a QR code with a knowledge check. There's going to be 3 questions regarding the reading and this slide.
Finally, we will discuss emergent trends, controversies, and important directions for survey research in the future. One important direction for the future of survey research is a combination of survey data with organic or big data sources. Organic data sources are available to better understand behavior and are collected as part of people's daily life, including buying items, searching online, or posting on social media. Organic data used in conjunction with survey data will possibly allow for learning new things that neither source could have revealed on its own. This conjunction will also possibly allow for a reduction in the number of questions needed to be asked on questionnaires, which would therefore reduce the burden on the respondents of questionnaires in the future. An emergent trend in survey research that is also kind of a historical trend is the telephone mode of surveying. It was not discussed in this particular textbook since 1978, but it was brought back into this edition as well as partially discussed in the 3rd edition in 2009. Telephone as a mode of surveying is now commonly used for certain types of surveys and is especially important in mixed mode survey designs, which we will be conducting with our research project. The 3rd edition stated that the telephone mode of surveying was widely used from the 1980s through the 1990s, and they used random digit dialing or RDD procedures. And this is also around the time when cellular telephones or mobile devices became more popular, and there was a turn towards self-administered survey modes in search of alternatives to RDD sampling. Another emergent trend is panel surveys, where the internet is the primary mode of survey response. Overall, surveyors are turning to designs where people are asked to participate in multiple surveys over time due to the rising cost of recruiting people to participate in surveys. If you already have one group that's willing to participate, you can use them multiple times is how this works. It takes advantage of the low cost of contacting people by email to respond to web surveys on a regular basis, and it does seem to work best on a large scale, such as a nationally representative panel. So an example of a panel survey that one of the textbooks included was the LIST panel, created in the Netherlands in 2007. It is made up of a probability sample of households drawn from the nation's primary statistical agency and includes about 5,000 panel members. And then how this works is, like I said, the members or the 5,000 people involved are asked to complete online surveys about one time a month. And in this specific panel survey group, they are given a modest payment in exchange for completing the surveys each month. The final emergent trend is the technological changes that are occurring and their adoption into survey research. So technological changes are at an unprecedented rate, and they have been for several years now. Majority of American adults now do have a smartphone, and the small screens that are included on smartphones present challenges to surveyors because these small screens change the way that people communicate and how online surveys need to be designed in order for them to complete it on a smartphone. Open-ended questions asking for long, detailed answers are specifically difficult to complete on a mobile phone and can be more easily answered on computers. On mobile devices, it is more likely that individuals will answer long, open-ended questions with greatly abbreviated answers, similar to the way they text. Also, smartphones change when and where people respond to surveys, so I did discuss that in a previous slide, but if an individual opens an email with a survey on their phone, they can't access it from the phone. They have to remember to go back and complete the survey on a different device at a different time, which is extremely difficult with people's busy lives and all the things that they're trying to complete in a day.
This is just a brief table that shows how survey respondents and involvement have changed over the past 75 years. So once again, I'm not going to read every single thing to you. However, take a minute to look at this chart and kind of compare how things have changed from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s to the present. Obviously, some things are very different from the 90s to the 2020s. However, a lot of it is still relevant today.
A controversy that is related to survey data is data security. Entering and answering online surveys can require an individual to remember and also type complicated security codes and other information, which becomes an overall barrier to responding to surveys. And also, like I talked about at the beginning, online surveys can be hosted and the data can be collected from different sources, and using servers not controlled by the surveyors is a controversy as other people are receiving that data. Another controversy that is very relevant right now is creating surveys for diverse respondents. So household members and individuals' desires or interests must be taken into consideration. Right now, a respondent's power to say no to responding to a voluntary survey and the likelihood of them acting on that ability has never been greater. So that means that surveyors must design and implement surveys in ways that take into account respondents' needs and preferences, and this requires incorporating a variety of respondent-centric features into the design of surveys.
Now that you've listened to us talk about surveys for a good chunk of time, we have a quick knowledge check at the end of this that is formatted like a survey to test your knowledge of what you've just learned and how to apply it. Additionally, at the end of the quote-unquote hard questions, there is a fun section that you are able to complete. At the end, you are able to click, as it's a Google form, the show responses, and you can see what your classmates answered as well. So that's just a fun little thing to do. Scan the QR code, and that's all we have for you.